Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Entrepreneurship 101. We appreciate everybody coming out again for, as somebody noted, another rainy Wednesday. It seems like it's rained the last three, so we appreciate the great crowd that we have here today. We have a little bit of a different setup tonight just because we had the Gardner Awards earlier today and weren't able to sort of fix it all around. But actually this one, while it looks nice, it doesn't fit as many people in, so we'll probably go back to the other seating next Wednesday. So I just have a couple announcements to make first before we get into our lecture. I just wanted to welcome all the people that we have webcasting our Entrepreneurship 101 events. Our webcasting was just begun in September this year when we launched the program, and we're so delighted that we're starting to get a bigger and bigger audience every week. We have a lot from Ontario, including as far as Guelph and Sudbury, which I was actually just in Sudbury last week, so I'm really excited that they're watching from up there. We have a lot of viewers from around Canada, as far west as Saskatchewan, from PEI, and we actually have quite a large group watching from Moncton, New Brunswick, from Tech Southeast there. And as far as sort of international destinations, where we have viewers from India, California, and St. Kitts. So we're really excited that this program is expanding its reach, especially across Canada, because it is really something that we want to help Canadian entrepreneurs. So in other announcements, we have at Mars an upcoming one-day event called the Future of Medicine. It's the third Future of Medicine conference that we've held here at Mars. And if you're in the life sciences and healthcare space, there's a way that you can win a free ticket to this event, which is on November 17th. Actually, first I should say a little bit about the themes for the conference. There's two major themes. They'll be discussing neuroscience in the morning, and in the afternoon there'll be leaders of Ontario and Quebec's leading commercialization organizations. So that'll give you the opportunity to connect with those organizations. If you're in the life sciences and healthcare space and you're interested in attending, just send us an email at entrepreneurship101@marsdd.com describing your venture and why attending this conference will help your business grow. So if you do that before next Friday, November 4th, we'll get back to you if you want a ticket. And then the next slide is actually next week's event is one of those special events that we have as part of Entrepreneurship 101. It's a mini-series that we call Meet the Entrepreneurs. And we did this in response to previous years where people said they wanted to meet, they loved the lived it lectures where there's the big successful entrepreneur, but they also wanted to hear from the startup that was in the space right now. So what we've done is we're doing 4 Meet the Entrepreneurs in each of the Mars practices. The first one is ICE, which is Information Technology, Communications, and Entertainment, so digital media and making video games and stuff like that. So that will be next week. It starts at 6. There's a panel presentation with 3 startups. We're going to be doing a little bit of icebreakers at the beginning to get people talking a little bit amongst those that are in the ICT area. Then we'll have the panel presentation, and it's a bit longer of an event because last year we found that there were so many questions that we couldn't do it in an hour. So it's actually going to be about an hour and a half, and then it'll be followed by drinks and snacks networking in the atrium. So the companies that we have coming are G-Shift Labs, which has a SEO software called Web Presence Optimizer. The CEO of Deluxe, which is the first online destination of its kind in Canada. It offers women's contemporary fashion, accessories, and lifestyle products. And the CEO of Wave Accounting, which Wave is a free online accounting application for small businesses. So they're all really great companies with really dynamic founders, so you can come and ask lots of questions for them. So tonight's presentation, after that very long intro, is called Marketing for Tech Startups and about getting the fundamentals right. And our speaker tonight is John Warren, who actually works very closely with Mars and my team on a number of initiatives. Not only is he an entrepreneur himself, he's the co-founder of Clear Sky Advisors, which is a renewable energy advisory firm in Toronto. He's also been an advisor to many of Mars clients in the technology and clean tech space. In fact, John has been integral to making a lot of our workbooks, especially in the marketing strategy space, and designing workshops, which we'll talk a little bit about when we announce the Upstart competition, because we're going to run some workshops for people interested in that competition. About John Warren's background, he holds a Master of Science in Media and Communication from the London School of Economics. He also holds a Master of Science in Business and Economics from the Norwegian School of Management. He's from Norway. And he has about 18 years of experience in research, management, consulting, IT, and clean technology. So he's really an authority on how technology-driven markets impact strategy and marketing and sales activities. So a warm welcome to John Warren.
Thanks, Carrie. Good night, everybody. Or good evening, I should say. It's not quite good night yet. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's the third time I'm doing this lecture now. And for some reason, the luxury of copying last year's presentation is not giving to me because Carrie keeps giving me new things. So you should talk about this, so you should talk about that. So for those of you, I hope there wasn't anybody who's coming back from last year, but if you do, you will actually learn something new, hopefully. I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship, and I'm going to talk about marketing, so the intersection between the two, which is great because I feel very passionate about both of them. I've been an entrepreneur pretty much all my life. I've been part of several startups. And even when I worked with big corporations, I've generally just been doing that as an entrepreneur, so somebody who's responsible for launching new initiatives or bringing new products to market. I've always been in the marketing field, the marketing sales and strategy field, so that's my home base. That's the area I know and I like to talk about. So it's a pleasure for me to see so many of you here today, because I obviously think that entrepreneurship is very important. It's important for our society, for the Canadian economy, that we keep innovating and creating new successful companies. It's also very important that we get it right. We have very good engineers in Canada, very good scientists with lots of good ideas, but we're not that great at marketing and bringing them to the market. So hopefully what I say today will give you some idea about the role of marketing in startups, so that we can maybe change some of that, so that we bring some more successes to the market. Just going to go straight to the heart of things. Marketing has a very broad definition. This definition is taken from the American Marketing Association. It shows that marketing comprises a lot of different things. It's an organizational function. It's a set of processes, and those processes deal with things like creating, delivering, communicating. So quite diverse set of processes, and they involve both the organization itself and its stakeholders, and stakeholders can be many. So there are a lot of different things involved in marketing, and what I like about this definition in particular is that it demonstrates this sort of holistic mandate about marketing to be involved in all aspects of creating and delivering and managing relationships with customers. Moving on from there, the marketing mix is kind of the broad overview of the tool set that is available to marketers. So, this is often referred to as the 4 Ps of marketing. This is the traditional way of looking at it. Some people say there are 5 Ps now or 6 Ps. I'm quite conservative in that sense, so I'm going to give you the traditional one. So, on the top we have product, we have price, we have promotion, and we have place. So product is kind of obvious what it stands for. So marketing essentially is responsible for defining the value proposition that you're offering to the clients. It's responsible for positioning and setting the right price in the market that customers will buy for. It's also responsible for any promotional activities, whether it's sales promotions or it's marketing communication activities. And place means also usually it's replaced by delivery or distribution, depending on what type of business you're in. So that's the broad tool set, and again, it illustrates that holistic, the all-encompassing nature of marketing thinking. Now, moving forward from the marketing mix, obviously with that broad of a mandate, there's a lot of important decisions that marketing get involved in, whether it's product and feature sets, or it's setting the right price, or it's finding the right distribution channels. Those are key decisions for any startups to make. Now, how do you make sure that you get the right type of decisions? How do you make sure that you commit the right type of resources to the right initiatives and to the right type of strategies? You know, Canadian startups are typically underfunded. A lot of people are having to bootstrap. So making the wrong bet is not necessarily a good thing. It could essentially be catastrophic. So we're going to start with, you know, from the very beginning. I assume that some people here, maybe all of you, have some idea or a vision that you'd like to roll out. And I'm going to use that, an idea or a vision, to illustrate how to move forward integrating marketing thinking in the development of your business. Your idea might be based on you know, a patent. It could be based on a specific insight you have. It could be based on gut feel. A lot of entrepreneurship is driven by gut feel. But I think what I'm presenting today is kind of an attempt at maybe removing certain aspects of it from gut feel to more analytical platform. I think essentially every business needs to have a certain element of an analytical platform for making sound decisions. It takes away risk and increases chances of success. So in case you don't have a business idea right now, I thought I'd offer you some help. So I was recently in Iceland just as a visitor, but people in Iceland are pretty creative. So I'm going to give you a couple of ideas that already have been taken in case you were thinking about them. So you can either buy a piece of Glacier. I'm not sure how well it travels, but it's available to you. Or you could buy a piece of mountain from Iceland. In either case, you know, it's already done, so I wouldn't necessarily go there. The mountain idea is brilliant. You know, it's a volcanic island. They have mountain grow, essentially. So you have an endless supply chain. I'm just not sure where the customer is at this point. An interesting concept that might be more of a niche product, putrified shark meat. I'd like to draw your attention to the compelling advantages there. It's usually buried for months. It's washed down with ice-cold brennivin, which is Icelandic for foul liquor. And it's chewy and semi-opaque. How's that for USP for you? And it can have a pretty strong taste. Anyway, my favorite example is fresh Icelandic mountain air. Not sure how the fresh works with canned, but they make it happen, so good on them. The point is that we have an idea, and the first milestone that we're trying to get to as a business is a value proposition. Now, value proposition doesn't necessarily mean that we have a finished product, but it means that we made a set of decisions. So a value proposition statement typically consists of 4 essential parts. So it talks about what you're offering. It talks about the specific value of what you're offering. And it talks about for whom you're creating value and what makes your product special or unique. So there are 2 things about the value proposition. Number 1 is that once you have made those decisions, you have something you can talk about. So when people ask you, you know, what is it you do? You can say, well, here's what we do. For customer so-and-so, we deliver a product so-and-so, and it has these benefits. And because we use a unique proprietary, patented, whatever kind of process, we're the only ones who can solve that problem. So that's, you know, a value proposition can help you communicate that. But the more important aspect of a value proposition is that it reflects a set of internal decisions that you made. Because there's a lot of commitment in here. You've answered a lot of questions when you've created a value proposition. So, for instance, what should the product or the application look like? You know, once you sit down and think about that, you have to make choices. You have to choose a specific feature set. You have to choose certain things over other things because you don't have the time or the resources to develop everything, at least not to begin with. You have to make a choice about who should buy it. Who should be your first customers? Like, you can't sell it to everybody. I mean, ideally, everybody will buy one, but that's not necessarily how it works. Nobody gets 100% penetration. And having an idea of who you're selling to is not just important in terms of defining what kind of problem that you're trying to solve, because the problems are usually tied to specific customer sets. But it also gives you an idea about how to communicate and how to reach them with your communication. So that's a very essential decision. How do they buy? What are the steps they undertake? And why would they pick us over the competition? To have an idea about these kind of things, a lot of people, entrepreneurs typically go ahead based on, as I said, gut feel. It's a traditional way. Entrepreneurs tend to be quite driven by their ego and the urge to create something and build something. And that's essential that we keep. But if you're one of these entrepreneurs that has an idea, I urge you to try to write down the answers to these questions. At this point, you may have partial answers, may not have the full, be able to articulate very detailed answers to this, but the more detailed you can get, the better it is. But the first step I would recommend for anybody is try to document this, the assumptions that you make. And then you got to go and investigate whether or not your assumptions are true. So we're going to rely on a process that is essentially documented by Steve Blank in a book called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. The book came out in about 2005. Steve Blank is an entrepreneur of about 30 years experience from Silicon Valley. And his book is almost like a prescription. These are the steps you take from idea generation and through to building a company. And the great thing about that is that once you read the book, you feel as if, oh yeah, I can do this. It's like going to the kitchen and following a recipe. Obviously, it's not as easy as that, but I like the idea that he can popularize entrepreneurship like that. I think that's a great strength of it. But essentially what Steve Blank says, and this is the whole underpinning of the book, is that we have to question our assumptions. So, if you had started up, as I mentioned a minute ago, by documenting some of the key assumptions about who your customers are, what the problems they have, and what kind of features would help solve those problems, then you have a starting point for questioning your assumptions. What you want to go out to do is to get a better idea of exactly who are your customers that you can help, and exactly what kind of problem are you going to solve for them. How well does your product concept today meet the requirements of those customers? What kind of distribution do you need to put in place to reach them? What should be the appropriate pricing point? What kind of demand creation do you need to do in order to get volume or get the required amount of business for you? What kind of market type do you operate in? And who's your competition? So Steve Blank has detailed this, this is what he's described in his book. Is called the customer development model. And it consists of 4 phases. And the first one is customer discovery. And then the second one is customer validation, customer creation, and company building. Each of them are broken down into more detail. And I'm going to talk about the first 2, customer discovery and customer validation, because those 2 are the ones that lead us to the essential first couple of decisions or milestones that we need to get to as entrepreneurs. The first one, customer discovery, gives us the information that we've talked about up until now that allows us to formulate a value proposition. The second one, customer validation, gives us the information that allows us to design our business model. So those 2 decisions are absolutely critical. And if you go and talk to some of the advisors at Mars or at any of the regional innovation centers in Ontario that have portfolios of companies, startup companies and entrepreneurs, they would say that those are the 2 most difficult hurdles that startups face initially. It's arriving at a well-defined and a crisp and succinct value proposition that doesn't just sound good and communicate well, but it also reflects a realistic aspiration for the company. The other one is obviously to define a sustainable business model. A business model that demonstrates how you can make money given the amount of input and resources you have to commit in delivering your value proposition, and are selling and distributing that to your target customers. So we're going to talk about customer discovery and customer validation in this lecture. All of this material is documented in something called the Entrepreneur's Toolkit. I'll give you the URL for that, but it's where all these resources that we have developed on the Mars website is available. All right, so the first one, customer discovery. It's essentially an iterative model, and the iteration is built on the logic that you can go out and test your assumptions, test your hypothesis and see if they hold true, test the idea of a product that you have and see if it's sufficiently valuable for your customers. And then you sit down, you take a step back, and you try to verify, have I actually got an idea that is good enough, or do I have to make adjustments and try all over again? And the other thing, or the other question is, or is what I'm trying to do simply not good enough to survive in the marketplace? So he's offering you an out. He's advising entrepreneurs that if what you're doing at this point in time is not good enough, then maybe you want to rethink things. And I think that's extremely valuable advice. Entrepreneurship is not about just creating one thing. I think it's, for me, it's a lifestyle. I think it's innately human to be an entrepreneur, but I don't think we need to succeed necessarily the first time. I think entrepreneurship is about creating things, and as human beings, we like to create things. So there's no downside to abandoning an idea if it's a poor idea, and instead trying over again. We are creative. Ideas are not in short supply. The Icelandic has documented that for us. There's plenty of creativity. So we just got to trust that we have that skill in ourselves to, when the time is right, to abandon an idea and go with something else. All right, so let's get into a little bit more detail about this. Stating your hypothesis. So what Blank is suggesting is that any assumptions that you have about your product concept, about your customers, about how they buy, about the problem that you're trying to solve for the customer, he wants you to write it down, document it, and document it in a way that you can test it. So if anybody here has a science background, I think the idea of a hypothesis is quite well understood. A hypothesis is something that you subject to testing to find out whether it's true or not. So he suggests just write down half page, maybe a page or 2-page brief, everything you know about your customer's problem. What's the nature of it? How urgent is it or dramatic is it for your customer to solve that problem? And you might have a lot of thoughts about that, and that's great. Put it all down on paper, and then the motto of Steve Blank is get out of the building. Here it says, a lot of entrepreneurs, to sit and work on a product, think a lot about the product concept, and want to get everything right. Steve Blank says, that's not necessarily the way it should work. So his suggestion is product development and customer development are two processes that run in parallel. So he wants you to get out of the building and start talking to the customers. And that's the second phase, is testing the problem hypothesis. So after you've documented it, you go out and you start interviewing people. You start interviewing, first of all, those in your immediate network. You get feedback. You get used to interviewing. The interviewing thing is not necessarily a trivial affair. I think this is probably the Achilles of this whole model, is essentially to be able to ask the type of questions that gives you the responses that are detailed enough so that you can make important decisions later. That's a skill, and to get to that skill level, it requires practice. So you start with those in your network where you have a lot of trust, where you can have open discussions, where there's not a whole lot of distance between you, and with people that can share. And then you start networking your way out to a bigger sphere of people, potentially in the industry where you want to have customers. But these are interviews that aren't salesy. So you start by saying, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I want to discuss an idea I have. So that's how these conversations are run. And you ask them, all the things that you document in your hypothesis are the things that you want to ask them about. But these, and also these interviews are a means to getting further contacts, expanding your network, and getting your next interviews. He suggests dividing the testing phase into two. The number one is testing the problem hypothesis. So essentially the important part about the problem hypothesis is that it's very hard to ask people about, is this a good idea, the product, you know, or can you tell me what your needs are? You know, Steve Jobs, it was famous, at least it's been attributed to. I've never talked to him, so we're going to have to take it at face value. But you know, you can't do market research and ask people what they need because they don't know what they don't know. So it's you know, you kind of have to anticipate things. But people do know what they're trying to achieve, what their objectives are, and they can give you a reasonable idea about what's difficult about achieving those objectives. Those are customer problems. So you want to make sure that you get feedback that is specific about customers' problems and the consequences of that problem. You know, what is the impact of having that problem? Is it time? Does it mean that having a certain problem, struggling with the process, does it cost you time? Is it a suboptimal result because you can't do something properly? Does it mean that the quality of what you're trying to do is not the way you want it to be? Is it a cost problem that you just have to throw too many resources into something to try to solve the problem? So you want to figure out what the problem is and what the nature of the problem is. You know, how are people struggling based on what they're trying to achieve? That's the problem interview. Then you go back and you refine your product concept based on the feedback you get, and you take the product concept out for a new round of interviews. Same kind of interview. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I like your feedback on this. So you have a product concept, and the purpose of the product concept testing is you want to figure out what kind of features that you need in order to solve the problem adequately. We got a problem here that we're trying to solve. How does it need to work in order to solve it adequately for you? What's the output that it's required? So testing the product problem and testing for the product concept, those are the two essential steps of the customer discovery process. Verify, as I said, that's when you take a step back, you consider the feedback you've obtained through these interviews, and you ask yourself the question, do I have something I work with? Or if not, can I make an adjustment and then go back and test it again? Or do I have to abandon it and just rethink the situation? So, as I said, the customer discovery process gives you the answers that you're required to develop a value proposition statement. So it can, you know, if you've done this, it would have given you all the answers required to develop a succinct value proposition statement. As I mentioned, you know, the philosophical idea of Steve Blank and why he called it customer development was kind of to mirror this whole idea that you got product development going on in a startup, and that's mainly the main activity. You start off with an idea, you start developing a product or thinking about what it should be, and that's mainly what occupies an entrepreneur. But in a startup, he says, you need to have something else going on as well, and that's called customer development. It's a parallel activity. That's how you introduce marketing into a startup. It's by running product development and customer development at the same time, and make sure that the two are interlinked so that the feedback you obtain from the market when you go out and talk to customer, that you feed it back into your product development process. Make sense? Everybody following? Okay, good. All right, next step, next phase of the customer development, as I said, deals with the business model. So this is called customer validation. So now we have, remember now, we got a value proposition, we got an idea, and our product development is well underway. So now we've got 4 new steps involved in this process. The first one is prepare to sell. So he wants you to go out and sell something. Start selling, and it's the best way of validating if you got something that's worth doing, right? It's asking somebody, I'm going to give you this, and in return, I want your money. That gets people thinking, and it's a solid validation. What you want to, in prepare to sell, what you do is you prepare your documentation, you prepare all the sales collateral that you want, and all the sales sheets, and whatever is required in order to go out and present to the customer. Your first customers are called visionaries. Steve Blank actually calls them early evangelists. It's a funny word. I prefer visionaries, which is a term that Jeffrey Moore introduced in his book, Crossing the Chasm. Visionaries are usually the first people that buy any new product. Visionaries are the people that are attracted to new technology for the newness and for the potential of the technology. So they're a little less scrutinizing of the background of the company and how solid your technology is. If it has great potential, they'll love it. Now, you recognize a visionary by a couple of different traits. Number one is they already know that they have a problem. You don't have to interview them and go through the whole problem of telling there's a different way of doing things. They know it. They may have already have tried to solve it. They might have spent money trying to solve it, which is why they are the easiest sell, because they tried to solve it on their own unsuccessfully, and hopefully you got something better so that when you come along, they'll become your first customers. You'll actually find these visionaries during the customer discovery process. That's a great thing about it, is that you go in, you have a non-salesy conversation with somebody, but in that process, you are likely to end up talking to your first 5 customers. So it's not a waste of time. It's actually a revenue-generating activity that also has the positive effect of taking you forward as a company. After you sold to visionaries, you go back in and you start thinking about, okay, now for my next set of customers, how do I need to position my product? You're getting feedback. You know what's working when you're pitching. You know what's not working when you're pitching. So you have to refine the way that you're positioning your product. Get exact in terms of your pricing. Figure out who's your competition and how do you best relate to it. In other words, what's unique about me? You know, why would the customer go with what I have over what the alternative is? Sometimes, if you're one of those few entrepreneurs that have a very unique idea, you might think that you don't have any competition, but the customers always have options. So they have the option of doing nothing. And very often, that's the preferred option. So, so the position is essential here in order to get it right, to figure out how can I get somebody to make a decision that is urgent and make it urgently. Now, as with the previous process, the customer discovery, Blank says, we got to verify the customer validation process. And the essential question he wants to have answered at this point, do we have a go-to-market and sales model that is scalable? Do we know enough at this point about how people buy, what are the steps they buy in, and is that done in a way that means that we don't have to throw all our resources in every single sale, or can we actually scale it? So with scalability, I mean that we can replicate a sales process pretty much identical steps every single time. That's a really important thing, because without knowing that, we don't really have a sustainable business model. So when we talk about business model here at Mars, we like using a very visual representation that's developed by a fellow called Alexander Osterwalder. And he came up with what's called a business model canvas. It's got 9 different squares. And a lot of what we've talked about, you'll recognize already. Right in the center of the square, you see the value proposition. It's kind of the key which both your upstream activities, your key resources, your partners, and your key activities lead into the value proposition, and your downstream activities like your channels, customer relationship, and target customers that result from the value proposition. And then you got revenue stream and cost structure, and a sustainable business model is the one where it kind of tilts more heavy on the revenue stream than it does on the cost side. That's the easiest way of telling it, so it's kind of, well, this way if you're looking at the front here. So you want to know that you make more money than you spend. That's the easy way of putting it. So these are the two biggest things for entrepreneurs to do from the get-go. These are how we think that you can make sure that you get off the right way with your startup. And the best thing we can recommend you to do from here on is, check out all the resources that we have in Entrepreneur's Toolkit. The URL is there, is marsddo.com. There's a button in the sort of top right corner. In there, all the stuff that I've talked about today is documented. It's built up like a wiki. We even have it on the iPhone. There's an app you can download, and you can read small, brief articles that help define all the things that we talk about here. It also's got a set of workbooks, marketing strategy workbooks, marketing communication workbooks, that essentially takes you through these processes of arriving at the value proposition and the business model. So, but in addition to that, we got 7 more lectures that are marketing related that will go much more in depth on the different topics that I've talked about today. Starting November 16th, business model. December 7th, we got the value proposition. January 11th, market analysis. February 22nd, marketing communication. March 7th, go-to-market strategy. We got sales and distribution the following 2 weeks there. So it's a pretty good menu. You'll get a lot of detailed information about all of what we've discussed today. And then, as Kerry mentioned, we also offer some workshops for those of you who are participating in the upstarts competition that go essentially help you work through some of these issues that we discussed today. So, in summary, marketing as a holistic mandate. It deals with a lot of different aspects. It's not just about advertising. It's not just about campaigning or search engine optimization. It deals with product. It deals with fundamental decisions like the pricing of your product, the distribution channels, and so forth. The marketing activities, as we've talked about today, has to be part of the startup right from the beginning. It takes away risk of you going the wrong direction, committing too many resources on developing a product that we don't know that there's demand for. And it helps you glean important information about your target customer and how to communicate with them in the same process. So it's a hugely valuable process. The underlying philosophy here is just document your assumption and then questioning them, by asking customers, potential customers, and people in your network about what's their problem, how they like your product. And the process that I described today, the customer discovery and customer validation processes offer, solid avenues towards formulating a value proposition and a business model that are sustainable. So with that, I'd just like to say that I think there's a Steve Jobs in all of us. We may not have the same context as him, but I think entrepreneurship is, as I said, it's about living, it's about being a human being. And for that reason, I hope you all have found something that you find useful in your entrepreneurship endeavors today. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
If there are any questions, you can go to the mic. I have one from webcasting just asking if you could go into more depth about how you interview customers. If you don't have any yet, would you use focus groups? How do you find them?
Mostly you have one-on-one customer interaction. So it starts by documenting your assumptions, what you think is their problem, what you think would be a good solution for that problem, and then going out and asking them, okay, what is it that you're trying to achieve, and trying to get an in-depth understanding of where they're struggling in terms of making sure that they're reaching their objectives. So, as I said, doing those kind of interviews is not necessarily an easy thing. It requires practice, but doing them is hugely valuable because not only do you get very specific information to the questions you have, but you can get a better understanding of the whole market infrastructure. Who are the analysts out there? Who are the media? Who other people should you talk to? Who are your competition, and so forth. So it is well worth doing, but it's also something that it needs practicing. Yeah.
Wow, okay. I'm short and this is not, so I hope this works. Am I audible?
Yes.
Terrific. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but when you're talking about interviewing people, at what point can you interview people but without an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement? I've met some superb people who would be wonderful for the team. I want to talk to them, but then, of course, your brain says, shh, until they sign the NDA. So it's kind of, how much of the cat do you let out of the bag, and when and if sort of thing?
It's a really good question. The customer, and Steve Blank actually goes into this in some detail. There are differing philosophies about how to share, do you need an NDA, do you not need an NDA? This is a process that is designed for not having an NDA. It's designed for investing a lot of trust in the people that you talk to, thinking that they, in turn, will trust you to be the best person to carry out the vision that you have.
Look around you in the world today. We grow up hoping to be able to trust people, but we're surrounded by a world where that's falling apart.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective, absolutely. I just think there's a lot more to gain by going out there, putting yourself forward, and figuring out if this is a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Yes.
Here's a good question also coming from the webcast is, this is coming from a software web startup for consumers. Should I hire a chief marketing officer right away or do the marketing myself? Haha, very common question.
It's a difficult question. The way I would answer it, say, if you have the time to do it yourself, do it yourself. Because you don't exactly know who you're going to hire, you don't know the skill set you're required, the type of experience that would be good, unless you've had at least some of these conversations yourself. So having these kind of, some customer discovery conversation will allow you to figure out, am I on the right track, and what are the likely levers or buttons that I need to push in order to be successful. And then you can look for that kind of skill set in the person that you're hiring. So I would always think that an entrepreneur needs to go outside and do these kind of conversations themselves. If they need more bandwidth to get it done, then I think you hire somebody. But initially, for sure, you have to own the process. You have to know these things. This is your venture. It's your idea, and you can't outsource it.
Mr. Warren, this is the first lecture on marketing. I'm just wondering what your definition of a market is. What's your definition of a market?
Of a market?
Yeah.
Good question. So I put up the definition of marketing.
Yes, I'm just wondering what your definition of a market is.
Well, the market has principally three components to it. It has buyers and sellers and products.
Thank you.
Hi. Sorry, is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we already have, I'm sure for many people, they've already designed a technology or something, and they're basing their business on that. Is it okay in early meetings to, if we're just validating our value proposition, to come to the table with that specific technology, or would you say leave that aside for the time being?
I wouldn't, because it changes the nature of the conversation. You put a product in between you and another human being, and suddenly it becomes something completely different. So I would try to have these conversations without having a product present to begin with. I would try to have those in order to get a deeper understanding of the nature of the customer problem first.
Also, what do you think of sites like Kickstarter as a way of, are you familiar with it?
No, not really.
It's kind of a crowdsourcing site where you can sell your product in advance and get the funding in advance. It's good for, it seems like it's good for funding, and it seems like it's a good way to both validate your idea and find those early adopters.
Okay. It sounds interesting if it works. I would look for some testimonials or get some references, just to see if it's worked for other people in a similar situation to yourself.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm just wondering, I understand that this is sort of a feedback loop, but in the customer validation phase, when you're trying to prototype a product, what type of methodologies do you use? In certain situations, it's very hard to actually create an experience that would be able to sort of, work as the product experience. So I'm just wondering how you go about prototyping certain products.
So what kind of product are we talking about?
Like a location-based service, or like how would you, at an early stage, go about meeting with stakeholders and seeing how they sort of validate what you've already done?
Sure. So you want feedback on your product concept?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So having a prototype, and there are many different ways of doing that. If it's an IT-based product, there are ways of making mock-ups that you can show to people and get the responses to, and see, and get both some of the positive feedback and the negative feedback, some of their concerns with doing it, you could get. So, but I would always do that after I've actually validated that or verified that they have what kind of problem they have and how important is it to solve. So, because what you want from a test of a product concept is, does it solve the problem? Does it do the job? And how would you go about buying it? What kind of concerns would you have? What would be the immediate questions you would have around how it works, and price points and so forth.
Thanks.
That make sense? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question about validation. So what happens when you talk to a customer and he or she has no idea what you're talking about? For example, before Apple came up with the idea of the iPhones or iPads, customers have no idea what they really want out of a smartphone or tablet. So how do you validate your ideas when other people when customers don't really know what they want? So.
As I said initially, the purpose of the initial phase of customer discovery is not necessarily to figure out what people think they need, but to understand where they have problems. So it's the dynamic of the conversation is you're trying to figure out, okay, what are you trying to achieve in certain situations, and are there any challenges or any problems in achieving that? So you'll never get the direct answer that this is what I want, but you'll get, yes, I get suboptimal results. I don't really get the results I want when I try to do that. So that's where the product opportunity is. I think when you start off with a product or a vision, you also innately try to solve a specific problem. What you want validation for is that problem exists and exists for enough people. And that's by having that kind of conversation.
And so how do you choose the customers to do the validation process?
Blank goes on to describe various tiers of people to talk to. Essentially the word he uses initially is friendly contacts first. So the people that are close to you, the people that you know and that you trust are the first ones you talk to. And then you can ask them, who else do you think I should talk to, and ask for introductions and network your way into specific people that you think have this problem. So I think initially when entrepreneurs have an idea or a vision for a product, they also have in mind a specific customer. So you would ask your network and the people that you know for, do you know anybody like this? Can you make, or do you know anybody who know anybody that are like this? So it's about having that kind of conversations. You know, I find for myself and for my own business that having these kind of conversations are quite useful because people like talking to entrepreneurs. People like talking with people that have ideas and are trying to do things. So even if you're asking people to do a favor, they're happy to do it mostly because you know, they think that you're trying to do something positive, and because of that, they'll do that for you. So it's not too difficult an ask, even if you feel that you have to ask a lot of people to do you favors. I find that they're quite receptive to doing that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With a web service, your customers or your paying clients and your end user could end up being two different populations.
Yes.
When it comes to validating your idea and engaging them, where would you focus most of your attention and why?
So your customer and your end user. So the problem is always with the person who pays. So that's your customer. Yeah. So if somebody's suffering something, you know, and you're asking them to, they're the people that you're asking to pay, you got to figure out, does it solve the problem for them? So it's always with the person who pays. And in my world, the way you define a customer is, you know, is the person who pays.
Yep. I
understand that could be different from the user, but you know, somehow the user and the customer is related, I assume. So the important thing is, but it doesn't preclude talking to the user and making sure that things work. But in the initial phases, when you're trying to validate the problem, you want to make sure that there is indeed a problem that somebody is willing to pay for.
Okay. It's just because, like, if, say, it's a marketing service or something around those lines,
Yeah.
the paid clients would want to use your service, but then if you don't have the user base who's going to be seeing the things,
Oh,
then
yeah.
that's where issue comes into play, right?
Yes. So if you're in some sort of a double-sided business model, you essentially have two constituencies that you need to work with at the same time. It's a tricky thing because it's the chicken and egg situation, how you can get one without the other. So you need to have a double set of conversations, two loops, you know, if you like. So maybe it's more complicated, but you still need to solve the problem for both entities.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question from webcasting?
Sure.
So here's a question that goes a little bit more into product readiness to launch. What are the parameters that we can use to determine readiness to launch the product? Do we need to perfect the product offering? In consumer products, you have to, but how about in technology? Another very common question.
Yeah, perfecting the problem. I think the prevalent idea these days is called MVP, so minimum viable product. What essentially Steve Blank is suggesting, and a bunch of other people with him, Eric Ries, Ash Maruja, these are other people that write and work with the same kind of concept, is that, you know, we'd want to make sure that we don't overinvest in a product. And on the other side, we want to also make sure that we get revenue in as quickly as possible. I think I mentioned earlier that the best thing to do in terms of getting validation is ask somebody to hand over a check for what you do. So the minimum viable product is kind of a concept that is starting to get general acceptance, and that's far from the perfected product. And the reason why you can get away with something that is not perfect is that your first customer are these visionaries or the early evangelists, people that don't really care if it is a perfect product. So I was talking to, I did a workshop in Mississauga yesterday, and I was talking to somebody whose hobby is to do a lot of gaming. And I asked, okay, when did you last buy something from a startup? And he said, well, I buy a lot of indie games, he said, so from individual developers. And they're really not perfect products, but they have a lot of neat ideas. So he's a typical example of a visionary. He doesn't expect it to be perfect. He's happy to pay for it because he really likes just to figure out what's happening in my space. Visionaries are those kind of people that pay for that because they want to know and stay up front. They're emotionally invested in being up front, out in front and knowing what's going on in the field. So I would say, yeah, stop perfecting your product, get it out there and see if somebody wants to pay. Yes?
Hi. Can you talk about at which stage you include pricing as part of the conversation?
It can be part of the problem conversation, but it's more of an indirect part of the conversation at that stage, where if you have the opportunity and asking about a problem and asking what it costs
Right.
the customer. You know, what having this kind of nature problem or getting these kind of suboptimal results, you know, what would be worth to you to solve it? So getting that kind of, pricing, you know, I'll be the first to admit, it's really difficult to get right. But that can give you some idea. The other one is then when you test your product concept, because then you give them something to refer to. Then you give them, okay, this is what we're planning on doing, here are the feature set we're putting out there, you know, what would be willing to pay for that? You know, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I'm trying to get an idea of how much can it be willing to pay. So it's part of the customer discovery phase, but you know, at two different stages, and you approach it in two different ways.
And at which stage you should have the confidence that this is the right pricing models, that you should get ready to show the pricing model to the general public?
I'm afraid confidence doesn't have anything to do with entrepreneurship. You get, you know, a level of security that starts at 0 and you got up to here, right. And then you've done a good job at interviewing. So, and the other thing is pricing is a continuously evolving thing. You just got to have your finger on the pulse. You work with your gut feel. Your customers will tell you if you charge too much, and if you don't get any pushback on your proposals, well, then you're charging too little. So somewhere in between there.
All right. So. Okay, thanks.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
Sure. In your experience, how early should we show our concept? I mean, at the stage of having a mock-up prepared, for example, that's not interactable, or when we have a working prototype of some sort, right?
Mock-up's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, mock-up's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay. Just say, hey, when you click on this button.
No, if you start doing prototyping, you already invested a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about making decisions about creating a prototype is that decisions tend to indicate some level of commitment. And it's kind of hard to back away from that. So you'd want to get feedback before you make that kind of commitment and kind of persuade yourself that this is a good idea. So go with your mock-up, for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a really quick question, if I could do it. Just
okay.
Can I get the name of that book you're talking about from Steve Blank?
Yeah, the book is called 4 Steps to the Epiphany.
Okay.
And actually, it's a really, really complicated book, and they've made a cheat sheet for it. There's the other one that is way simpler. You'll see it. It's a really complicated
It's not
book.
a complicated, it's a dense read.
It's a really dense read. So there's actually other people, because it's so famous, they've made, you know, if you want to start with the simple version and then go into the hugely dense read, but it's totally invaluable. Okay, one last question, sorry.
Thank you. What strategy would you suggest a tech startup that is doing something in the software services sector, for example, software development, but not really something innovative like you had discussed earlier?
If it's not that innovative, one of the key decisions that Steve Blank, you can still follow this discovery process and validation process. You don't necessarily need to have a super disruptive technology to use this process. It works on pretty much all startups. But where you end up coming is, he asked you at some point to make a decision about your market type. And the answer to that is either you can be in a new market. Essentially, what that means is that you're trying to solve a problem nobody else has solved before. Or you're in an existing market where you are introducing something into a market where somebody has tried to solve it, but maybe you can solve it better. And the nature of the competition and how you communicate and engage with your customers is widely different in the two markets. So what you're saying is that I'm going to enter an existing market, and in an existing market, what you do is that you compete on feature and performance. Now, this is about just very straightforward customer differentiation and targeting. So niche marketing, targeting. Whereas if you're in a new market, there's all these kind of things about you have to educate the customer, you have to work through your visionaries, and all of these kind of things that means that there's a slightly slower path, but potentially bigger upside.
Thank you.
To answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for tonight's presentation. We know marketing, we see lots of great ideas at Mars, and probably the biggest challenge for entrepreneurs is executing them and bringing them to market. So marketing is hugely important. Thanks so much.